Chapter 356, Heart Killing. Opportunities? Jian Wushuang was intrigued by these words. Each trial in Ancestors' Land was accompanied by gifts, like what he had got after passing the first trial. Surely he would get more after passing the second trial. It is the same as the first trial. You will be given 3 opportunities. Jinling said, "Follow me." Led by Jinling, Jian Wushuang went to the altar of the Ancestors' Land again. There was a chain bridge leading to the core of the Ancestors' Land, and Jian Wushuang walked along it, towards the center. He found himself in a vast wasteland with a towering sword mountain. On the mountainside, there were several ancient characters. Jian Wushuang couldn't read them, but he felt they were mysterious. You're a core disciple of the Sword Ancestors bloodline now, so you are admitted to accessing to the strongest sword skill sword ancestor created, heart killing. Jinling looked at Jian Wushuang. Heart killing sword technique? The most powerful sword skill sword ancestor created? Jian Wushuang was stunned. At the height of the Sword Ancestors bloodline, only the Sword Ancestors' personal disciples were permitted to study it. However, things are different now. A genius like you is rare among the descendants of the Sword Ancestors bloodline. Therefore, you are qualified to study it, Jinling said. There are 9 sword movements in total, and each character on the mountainside contains 1 movement. You only have 1 chance to see them. Keep in mind, what you need to do is to try your best to memorize as much as possible. It's up to you to remember them. Jian Wushuang nodded seriously. 9 characters in total, each one containing 1 sword movement. Go ahead. After saying that, Jinling and Mushan stepped back. Jian Wushuang stood alone at the foot of the mountain, looking up at the characters. Suddenly, the first character began to shine. A picture appeared in front of Jian Wushuang's eyes. It was a black-clothed elder, practicing a sword movement. He watched carefully and kept all the details in his mind. But it only lasted for a moment. As the first character's light disappeared, the second character began to shine. So fast. Jian Wushuang frowned secretly. As soon as the first one finished, the second one started. Jian Wushuang noticed that there was a connection between them, so if he couldn't memorize the first character, it would be difficult to understand the second one. As Jinling had said, there was only 1 chance, and he needed to memorize as much as possible. Jian Wushuang closed his eyes and completely immersed himself in the image. One by one, they flashed through his mind, each one only being displayed once. Jian Wushuang only had 1 chance. Not far behind Jian Wushuang, Jinling and Mushan stood, staring at him. It's the 6th movement. It seems he has memorized the first 5 movements. To memorize the 6th should be easy for him, and the 7th is possible, but the 8th will be difficult, Jinling murmured. With the heart-killing sword technique, the further he goes, the more subtle the technique becomes. Therefore, it's hard to memorize all 9 movements in one attempt. During their heyday, even the Sword Ancestors' personal disciples could only memorize 7 at most with 1 glance, Mushan said, then sighed with feeling. The 9 sword movements of the heart-killing sword technique. The sword movements alone were simple. But, understanding the abstruseness, that was difficult. Too complicated, too abstruse. If you didn't understand it at a glance, how could you memorize it? Because of that, it was fortunate if someone could memorize the first 7 movements in a single attempt. Jian Wushuang's father, Jian Nantian, watched them once and memorized the first 7, but he failed on the 8th. Jian Wushuang has awaked double first-grade sword souls, so he is more talented than his father. It's possible for him to memorize the 8th. Jinling thought. On the side of the sword mountain, the 7th character began to shine. Though the 7th was more abstruse than the previous 6, Jian Wushuang still firmly kept it in mind. Then the 8th character. Both Jinling and Mushan stared at Jian Wushuang, watching him memorize the 8th. Then the last one. The 9th, which was the last one, began to shine. The 9th movement. Jinling and Mushan were full of expectations. The most powerful movement. Even at the height of the Sword Ancestors bloodline, only 1 person managed to memorize all of them. However, he was a traitor. A green light flashed on the mountainside, then everything calmed down. Jian Wushuang was still standing there, with his eyes closed, recalling all the images and memorizing them. Then he opened his eyes and sighed, with a light flashing in his eyes. The heart-killing sword technique really is the most powerful sword skill sword ancestor created. Jian Wushuang thought. He scanned them all once again, and only one word could describe how he was feeling right now. Awesome! Jian Wushuang was good at sword principle, so he understood the power of this sword skill. In comparison, the blood-emptying technique and selfless sword technique, as powerful as they were much weaker than heart-killing sword technique. The heart-killing sword technique had high requirements. The first movement required a Saint Realm expert whose comprehension in slaughter origin had reached the pinnacle. This was the first movement. The other 8 movements were even more powerful and had even higher requirements. I have memorized all 9 movements of the heart-killing sword technique. However, I'm unable to even study the first movement, Jian Wushuang said with a bitter smile. Chapter 357, Multifarious Sword Skills. Jian Wushuang, how is it going? Jin Ling and Mu Shan came over to Jian Wushuang and asked him. I've memorized all the movements of the heart-killing sword technique, Jian Wushuang answered. Great. Jin Ling was very happy to hear that. You've done as well as that traitor, Mu Shan said with a smile. Traitor? Jian Wushuang was intrigued by this information. This was your first chance, the heart-killing sword technique. Let's move on to the second one, said Jin Ling. Then he led Jian Wushuang to a tall tower. The tower was about 24 meters high, the top of which thrust into the clouds like a sharp sword. In the upper part, there were 2 elegant words, Sword Tower. This is. Jian Wushuang looked up at the lofty building before him. It's the Sword Tower, as you can see, Jin Ling said. It consists of multifarious sword skills, and it's one of the most important heritages of the sword ancestors' bloodline. Most of the sword skills inside were created by the top experts of the sword ancestors' bloodline, while the rest were collected from other places. There are many skills of various kinds. Only 1/10 of the skills were handed down after the destruction of the sword ancestors' bloodline. But, at present, those are enough for you to practice. You can stay inside as long as you want and carefully choose skills you want to learn, either by reading or memorizing them, but you can't take them out of the tower. Understood. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly. You can enter, Jin Ling said. Jian Wushuang thought nothing of stepping into the tower. As soon as he entered, he saw lines of bookcases filled with thick and dense books. Even with only a quick glance, it was obvious that there were tens of thousands of books. He went to the first bookcase, on which he noticed a list of books. He was immediately shocked by the number of sword skills that were recorded on the list. 6,400 third-grade sword techniques, 970 second-grade sword techniques, 10 first-grade sword techniques. Holy God! Jian Wushuang was deeply shocked. The amount of treasure accumulated by the sword ancestors' bloodline over the long years was simply amazing. There were a great number of the third-grade original sword techniques as well as 970 second-grade sword techniques. If these sword techniques appeared in the Nanyang continent, a considerable number of Saint Realm experts would go crazy over them. But, inside this tower, they were so common that there was almost 1,000 of them. As for the first-grade sword technique, they only existed in the legends of the Nanyang continent. That was also true for manuals, magic weapons, and elixirs of the first grade. Powerful as the Holy Emperor Palace was, it only had 8 superior second-grade manuals. But in this tower, there were up to 10 sword skills of the first grade. What did this mean? If these scrolls were taken out to the Nanyang continent, all the forces and experts would go crazy trying to snatching them. More importantly, even though only 1/10 of the sword skills were maintained after the fall of the sword ancestors' bloodline, the number of sword skills stored in the tower was still a vast amount. If this amount of sword skills still remained, one can only imagine how many there were when the sword ancestors' bloodline was at its peak. Just thinking about it was enough to shock Jian Wushuang. There are many types of sword skills, from various fields, but which ones would be useful to me? Jian Wushuang immediately began checking them carefully. He started by checking the 10 first-grade sword techniques. Even though these 10 sword skills were no match for the heart-killing sword technique, which was created by the sword ancestor himself, they were still very powerful. First grade sword technique, mind's eye sword technique. A single glance at the introduction on the scroll was enough to cause Jian Wushuang's eyes to light up. Mind's eye sword technique was a special and unique sword skill. Maybe it would be better to call it a method. It was a technique for warriors to condense their sword essence and store it between their eyebrows. Once released, the essence would surge out with a quick burst. Store sword essence between the eyebrows? Jian Wushuang smiled. He had heard of many sword skills, but the mind's eye sword technique was the most unusual and unique one that he had seen. But he also understood how devious this technique could be if used at the right time. What would happen if someone unexpectedly attacked with a powerful blast of sword essence from between his eyebrows in the middle of a fierce fight? There are definitely very few people who could anticipate this attack and react quickly enough. The longer the sword essence is stored, the more powerful it will be. And it can be released in a split second. What a brilliant first-grade sword technique. Jian Wushuang praised it inwardly. If properly applied, this sword skill could be a weapon of mass destruction, so Jian Wushuang was very interested in it. However, he was in no rush to practice it right this moment. He continued to look through the rest of the first-grade sword techniques. 4 of the 10 first-grade sword techniques were powerful attacks that worked well with slaughter origin. As for 2 others of the 10, one attached great importance to speed while the other one was abstruse. But they were both powerful. The above 6 were skills for a head-to-head fight, while the remaining 4 were quite unusual. Mind's eye sword technique was one of them. To Jian Wushuang's surprise, he also found a sword skill named Multifold Realm among the remaining 4. Similar to the sword realm that he had gained from the Deluo Heaven sect, the Multifold Realm was also a skill that could overpower an opponent by forming a sword realm. But, as a first-grade sword technique, Multifold Realm was much more powerful than Sword Realm. It was divided into 5 levels. The first level, the First Realm. The second level, the Tenfold Realm. The third level, the Hundredfold Realm. The fourth level, the Thousandfold Realm. The fifth level, the Multifold Realm. Each level was more powerful than the previous one. The power behind the combination of Blood River, Slaughter Domain, and Sword Realm is my trump card. But it's a pity that Sword Realm is only a third-grade skill. Even though I've mastered it to the highest level, Sword C, it still isn't that helpful when combined with the Blood River from Road to the Underworld. But Multifold Realm is different. As a first-grade sword technique, even the first level of it is much more powerful than Sword C. Combined with Road to the Underworld, the force will only be stronger. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered. Among the 10 first-grade sword techniques, this technique was his favorite, followed by Mind's Eye sword technique. Inside the tower, as he casually looked through the scrolls, he would pay more attention to the techniques that surprised him, which increased his understanding of sword principle more and more as he progressed. While immersing himself in study, he lost track of time. Chapter 358, Blood Puppet. While Jian Wushuang was digging through the sword skills in Sword Tower, the Nanyang continent gradually settled down. 1 year passed in the blink of an eye. After spending a year in the tower, Jian Wushuang finally exited. He had been constantly studying and practicing sword skills during this year. Now, he was like a completely different person, much stronger in sword principle and origin comprehension. With his excellent talent and the awakening of his double first-grade sword soul, which was very helpful in comprehending both sword principle and origin, he naturally reached the pinnacle level of origin. Moreover, he gained a new understanding of origin once he reached the pinnacle. This pinnacle was the pinnacle of the Saint Realm. It was totally different from momentum and domain because it was only a vague concept that represented a certain level of progress, but everyone in this realm would possess a different level of strength. If the origin was a vast ocean, comprehending a single drop of water would enable someone to step into the pinnacle of the Saint Realm. However, there was still a huge difference in power with respect to how much one comprehended. Currently, Jian Wushuang had only comprehended a single drop of water from the origin since he had reached this realm just recently. Jin Ling and Mu Shan were waiting for Jian Wushuang as soon as he walked out of the tower. You have only stayed for 1 year. Jin Ling looked at Jian Wushuang with astonishment and asked, "Don't you want to stay longer?" No, Jian Wushuang shook his head and replied. He had already gained a lot from the tower and got what he wanted, so staying longer would bring him nothing but slow progress in sword principle. I've received 2 of the 3 opportunities. What's the last one? Jian Wushuang asked directly. The last one is this. As Jinling waved his hand, a bloody shadow flashed and appeared before Jian Wushuang. It was a burly man in red armor, boots, and a helmet. His arms were wrapped around his chest and an emotionless light shined from within his cold eyes. A puppet fighter? At a glance, Jian Wushuang could tell the man was not human, but a puppet fighter like Bai Ling and Mu Shan. He is a blood puppet. Jinling looked at Jian Wushuang and explained, he is not a normal puppet fighter. He was made to slaughter and destroy. Since he possesses no intelligence, he will only obey his master. Back when Sword Ancestor was at his peak, he was not only talented in sword principle. He was also gifted in regards to making puppets. He created Mu Shan and I and gave us consciousness. This blood puppet is the strongest puppet fighter among the ones he made. Jian Wushuang stared closely at the blood puppet. Without exchanging even one move, Jian Wushuang already felt terrifying pressure from the puppet standing before him. This blood puppet's body is as strong as a magic weapon. It also possesses excellent attack, speed, and defense, so it only has one weakness. Blood gems are required to power it each time, Jinling added. Blood gem? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. Yes, like these. Jinling turned over his hand and showed Jian Wushuang 3 waxy yellow gems. Blood gems are the only things that can power a blood puppet. I will give you these 3 for now. Jinling handed the gems to Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang held the gems in his hands and could feel a terrifying power contained in them. He was amazed. With these 3 gems, you can use this blood puppet 3 times. Of course, if you want it to increase its strength, you could use all 3 gems at the same time. Jinling continued, but normally, with only 1 gem, the puppet would be much stronger than an expert at the pinnacle of the Saint Realm. Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang frowned, then asked, which means, the more blood gems it consumes, the more powerful it'll be? Right. Jinling nodded. If you used 10 gems at the same time, you would reach the limit of his power, but that is the maximum. I see. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. Though the blood puppet was just standing there, yet to show his strength, Jian Wushuang could tell that the puppet was very strong because an overwhelming pressure had risen in his heart. With this puppet, he would have 1 more trump card. Since you've received your 3 rewards, it's time for you to leave, said Jinling. Jian Wushuang nodded before asking, what level do I need to reach to qualify for the 3rd trial? The 3rd trial is different from the previous 2. I have no idea what it is, only that it relates to a big secret. As for the level you have to reach, Jinling pondered for a while and continued, when you become as strong as Sword Ancestor at his peak, you can come back here and attempt the 3rd trial. As strong as Sword Ancestor at his peak? Jian Wushuang was astounded. With a bitter smile, Jian Wushuang entered the wormhole and left. Inside the dark forest of Qianzong Dynasty, Jian Wushuang sat down quietly, at the peak of a mountain, with his legs crossed and eyes closed. Soon after, a black shadow slowly split from his body. The shadow was none other than Jian Wushuang's slaughter doppelganger. Over a year has passed. Now, my slaughter doppelganger has finally been reborn. Jian Wushuang sighed in his heart. He lost his slaughter doppelganger in Tang Dynasty when he was chased by Tan Feng. He had been working on this new one for over a year before he finished it. In the Ancestors' Land, I received a lot and greatly enhanced my strength. With the 1st grade sword techniques, my trump cards, and my new slaughter doppelganger, it's time to settle the feud between me and Holy Emperor Palace. Jian Wushuang looked up, staring into the boundless sky. Then, a sliver of light flashed in his eyes. Meanwhile, an overwhelming killing intent surged out and swept through the sky. Chapter 359, The Selection of Disciples. During the year Jian Wushuang was in the Ancestors' Land, the Nanyang continent was rather peaceful. The disturbance caused by the fight between Jian Wushuang and Second Holy Master concluded with Jian Wushuang's disappearance. Though Holy Emperor Palace suffered a great loss at Jian Wushuang's hands, that didn't shake its position as an overlord of Nanyang continent. The entrance to Holy Emperor Palace was on a huge island named Holy Emperor Island. In recent days, The cities around Holy Emperor Island were crowded with experts from every corner of Nanyang continent. Inside a restaurant in one of those cities, a large number of warriors had gathered, most of whom were powerful youngsters. At a table sat two young men and a girl. One of the men and the girl were excited and looked like they were expecting something. Soon, we'll step onto Holy Emperor Island. I really want to see the location of the overlord of Nanyang, Holy Emperor Palace, myself. The man and the girl gasped in admiration from time to time, their eyes burning with excitement. The remaining handsome young man with purple hair looked calm. Brother Ji Chen, what's wrong? We'll arrive at Holy Emperor Palace soon. Why aren't you excited at all? The green-clothed girl asked in confusion. Holy Emperor Palace? The handsome young man with purple hair, Ji Chen, smirked and shook his head before saying, the palace is indeed powerful and also good at training disciples, but there are too many restrictions. I would rather temper myself by traveling the world rather than staying in the palace. Like Jian Wushuang? A voice echoed. Ji Chen and the other two immediately looked toward the person who was speaking and bowed slightly. Elder Chu. It was an elder with tangled red hair. He looked calm, and his aura showed that he was at the peak of the saint realm. The elder casually sat down beside them. Cleaning his ears, he said, Ji Chen, I know you greatly admire Jian Wushuang. Sure, he's quite strong and generally recognized as the strongest genius on the Nanyang continent by all the experts. But, until today, there has been no other genius like him in the history of Nanyang continent. You're indeed gifted, but still at no position to even compare with him. What you need is solid and steady progress. Don't aim too high. Ji Chen respectfully listened to the elder. Elder Chu continued, Holy Emperor Palace is the #1 sect in our continent and only accessible to top geniuses. All of its disciples are real experts. You three are the most talented in our desert dynasty, especially you, Ji Chen. All of you should try your best to pass the test of Holy Emperor Palace. Do not miss this chance, it only happens once in a blue moon. Understood. Ji Chen and the others nodded. While Elder Chu was talking to Ji Chen and the others, a young man carrying a long sword on his back was drinking alone at the table beside them. Not far from them, the young man heard their every word and smiled. Today, I arrived at Holy Emperor Island from Dark Forest, just as the palace is holding a selection for disciples. What a coincidence. The young man, Jian Wushuang, smiled oddly. He had heard about the selections previously. Holy Emperor Palace held it every 5 years in order to select its disciples. Numerous experts from Nanyang continent would swarm to the island whenever the selection was held, for the only purpose of becoming a disciple of the palace and cultivating there. Holy Emperor Palace was an overlord of Nanyang and could overpower the alchemy school. So, saying it was the #1 sect in Nanyang was a bit of an understatement. For those experts of Nanyang continent, it would be good fortune to be able to cultivate in the palace. It was similar to the Eastermost hunt, held by 12 northwestern dynasties in Qianzhong dynasty, that Jian Wushuang had participated in. Only some old sects had been present at the Eastermost hunt, yet there had still been a large number of experts fiercely fighting over it. It could be imagined how much more fiercely the experts would fight in the 5-year selection. While Jian Wushuang was in deep thought, suddenly, wang, wang, wang. A deep bell resounded from far off in the distance, reaching the city and the restaurant where Jian Wushuang was. The selection begins. Many young experts stood up the moment they heard the bell, including Ji Chen and the others with him. Let's go. Without thinking too much, those experts rushed towards the bell. In a second, the noisy restaurant had become empty. Jian Wushuang was the only one sitting there, not in a hurry to leave. After finishing the wine on the table, he got up and slowly headed towards Holy Emperor Island. At Holy Emperor Island, an ancient and majestic gate surrounded the area like a sleeping dragon. Jian Wushuang stepped onto the island only to see a huge crowd of people from all corners of the Nanyang continent standing in front of the gate. Some were alone, but others were accompanied by their elders. In front of them, next to the gate, there was a long and towering staircase that led to the top of the gate. From the look of it, it had over 100 steps. Is that the famous holy steps of Holy Emperor Palace? Jian Wushuang smiled while looking at the staircase. The staircase was well known. Everyone who wanted to pass the selection had to pass this first. There were a total of 108 steps, with each bearing a powerful force. The further one went, the more pressure one would feel. Passing those steps was the first test in the selection. The following test would only be available for those who climbed all 108 steps and made it to the top of the gate. At the moment, all of the experts were waiting quietly for the beginning of the selection. Jian Wushuang smiled while shaking his head as he watched the scene. The selection usually lasts for quite a while. I can't afford to wait until it ends. Jian Wushuang smirked. Then, with a flash, he appeared at the foot of the holy steps. Chapter 360. The Arrival of Jian Wushuang. On the vast open space beneath the holy steps, there was an atmosphere of anticipation. Countless young experts from all corners of Nanyang continent were waiting patiently. At the top of the holy steps, at the entrance of the palace, stood a few experts from the Holy Emperor Palace, among whom were 2 elders in the Saint Realm. The elders looked down at the crowd. The number of participants for the selection this time is quite a lot, likely more than those of the previous selections, one of the elders said. Yeah, you're right. But it would be good if even 20 of them could pass all the tests and become disciples in the end. Just watch, 2/3 of them will be eliminated during the test of holy steps, the other elder smiled and said. But, right at that moment, a figure quietly arrived, 1 step away from the first step. Hey! The experts all looked over in amazement. What is this guy trying to do? Is he planning to start climbing the holy steps? But the competition has yet to begin. He is so impatient. Those experts from Holy Emperor Palace also cast their eyes on Jian Wushuang. However, even under the gaze of all these people, Jian Wushuang still looked indifferent. He looked up at the top of the gate. Holy Emperor Palace. Finally, I'm here. A fierce sparkle flashed in Jian Wushuang's eyes. He had constantly been in a passive situation in the past, from the moment the fighting started with the Blood Feather Tower and Holy Emperor Palace until now. For a long time, he had been chased by Blood Feather Tower and Holy Emperor Palace, only being able to passively defend himself and fight back. In the battle with Blood Feather Tower, they threatened him with his father's life. In Ice Nether Valley, the experts from the palace tried to kill him directly. In the battle with Second Holy Master, he was barely left with any chance of living. He had always been suppressed, never proactively fighting back against Holy Emperor Palace. He really wanted to fight back. But he had never been about to, until today. It was the first time that he stood in front of Holy Emperor Palace of his own will. Since he was already on the path of revenge, only blood could settle the grudge. Let's begin. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang stepped forward under the surrounding people's shocked gaze. His step steadily and heavily fell on the first holy step. Crack! A deep sound was heard. The moment Jian Wushuang stepped on it, the first holy step, which was used as the first test, cracked and seemed like it might fall apart at any time, as if it could hardly bear Jian Wushuang's weight. What? The scene shocked the experts on the spot, as well as those from the Holy Emperor Palace. These holy steps were built at a great cost and could be used as a testing tool for the selection, so they were extremely durable. But now, the first step had been smashed by Jian Wushuang in only 1 step. Moreover, the moment Jian Wushuang took his first step, 2 30-meter-tall spectral images, filled with sword essence, appeared behind him with enough momentum to cause the whole area to shake. The essence began to surge, sweeping out in all directions. In an instant, the clouds began to dissipate with the rising wind, and the sky became dark. The surrounding warriors were all muddled because of the sudden change. Not only them, even the elders that accompanied them were frightened by the overwhelming sword essence that seemed to be blanketing the whole area with its power. The eyes that fell on Jian Wushuang this time were full of horror. Before this moment, they had thought that Jian Wushuang was only a normal participant in the selection because he was a young man in his early 20s. But now, after seeing his overwhelming sword essence, they realized that he was here to kill. At the top of the holy steps, the experts from Holy Emperor Palace were trembling at the sight of the essence, especially at the 2 huge sword soul phantoms behind Jian Wushuang. The phantoms stood, towering like 2 war gods, with a power that seemed to be able to destroy everything. The 2 palace elders in the Saint Realm were panic-stricken as they immediately looked toward Jian Wushuang. After that glance, their eyes narrowed. He is Jian Wushuang. They recognized him. One of the elders hissed while gnashing his teeth. The crowd beneath the gate was in a great uproar after they heard the name. Jian Wushuang. He is Jian Wushuang, the legendary genius of the Nanyang continent, #1 throughout its history, Jian Wushuang. One after another, the warriors participating in the selection roared and growled, with excitement and frenzy in their eyes. Jian Wushuang had become well known all over the continent. During the battle at Ice Nether Valley, he had overpowered 7 Saint Realm experts from Holy Emperor Palace. In the battle at the Skyward Mountain, he had barely survived, by luck, and even cut second Holy Master's legs off with one stroke. The legends of his brilliant battle results had spread to every corner of the Nanyang continent, so all the warriors on the island had heard of him. Many of them had even looked up to him as their idol. However, being as young as all these warriors, Jian Wushuang had achieved something that was beyond their reach. So naturally, those young warriors would become crazy while watching him. In addition to these young warriors, there were also many experts sent by some old sects for purpose of inspecting and learning from the selection. They hurriedly sent the news back to their sects as soon as they saw Jian Wushuang. Big news! Jian Wushuang appeared on Holy Emperor Island.
Urgent!
Jian Wushuang appeared. All of Holy Emperor Island was in a turmoil because of the arrival of Jian Wushuang. This turmoil even spread into the Holy Emperor Palace. Swish! 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 Suddenly, a number of figures appeared at the top of the gate from thin air. They were none other than the Palace Master and other elders of Holy Emperor Palace. The elders present numbered 20, and all of them were in the Saint Realm. Yet, even the Palace Master and those elders looked serious and grave at the sight of Jian Wushuang and his overwhelming sword essence.